So I'm going to be talking about aviation training in the future, the opportunities and the challenges. Before I start talking about the future, I think it's appropriate just to paint a picture of the aviation industry at the present. And because without trying to predict the future, one's got to know where one's coming from. Bluntly speaking, the aviation industry has entered a phase of intense turbulence that is unprecedented in the history of aviation. Technological improvements, I'll talk about a couple of those, the critical manpower shortages and significant growth are all creating complex challenges and opportunities for the industry. I think probably the first thing to start off with is the pilot shortage, unprecedented growth. The 2018 Boeing forecast is now the worldwide demand 790 pilots, 790,000 pilots in the next 20 years. I call it sort of 730,000, because we don't include helicopter pilots. But this is up 24% from the previous year. Last year their forecast was for 637,000 pilots. It's now jumped to 790. That is significant. The numbers are simply just staggering and causing many sleepless nights for the airline executives. On the one hand, they've got the constant cost pressure, and they're trying to sort of reduce costs as much as possible. And for this, the remuneration packages for pilots was the first place to start off with cutting. But this has backfired when the sort of pilots move to better remunerated jobs. That's an example of cost rationalisation. Look at Jetstar. Your cabin crew also check-in staff and undertake a multitude of other jobs. Legacy carriers such as Qantas have got to try and compete with these low-cost carriers. Either they reduce their cost or they differentiate their product. On the other hand, you can look at in-house training. It is an extra cost to the airline, which traditionally have poached the pilots as part of what happens. Some airlines do have cadet schemes or their own training facilities, and I applaud Rex Aviation for training their pilots from ab initio up to servicing their needs. Their chief pilot was recently bemoaning the fact that they had lost 57 pilots, captains, to Qantas and Virgin this year. So setting up your own training school is expensive undertaking, and there's no guarantee that you will reap the rewards of that, as those pilots could be poached. Some airlines now are starting to pay the bond of pilots that they are poaching, so that's quite a problem. I know of one airline that he'd spent ages, just got this person trained up, and within 2 weeks of operational duty that person said, sorry, I'm off to Virgin, and the person says, well, you've got this bond, don't worry, it's been paid. So that airline was a smallish airline, and they were really battling with them replacing that person that left. You look at airlines such as Korean Airlines that were faced with an outflow of pilots to sort of very better remunerated packages, expat packages in China. They've now introduced a better paid package, but also looking at lifestyle changes for the pilots. Airlines are currently really battling to keep up with recruiting and checking the new pilots to line, and this has led to rejigging of some of the fleet. I think everybody knows that Qantas has got a 747 servicing Sydney to Perth now just because they don't have sufficient 737 jockeys. I know that also the Qantas Cairns to Brisbane, their fleet has been changed due to pilot shortage. Skippers are battling with the shortage of check and training captains. I think they lost 9 captains in one week to the airlines, and this is creating a nightmare for the scheduling. It's a catch-22 situation. They have to recruit to meet the demand, but also you've got the expense of paying for these pilots, but they've still got to be checked to line, and there's nobody to check them to line. To conduct integrated training in Australia, flying school now has to fall under Part 142. It's a very costly and overly bureaucratic oversight regime that has no, and I repeat, no place for basic CPL training. I'm very proud the club has recently achieved our 142 accreditation, but at an enormous cost. Schools across Australia put the cost of getting this accreditation between $200,000 and $250,000, money which we simply cannot afford. Back to the pilot shortage. It is real, it is here, it's not going away, and it is going to get worse, much worse. However, this is only one part of the problem for airline executives. They toss and turn at night, unable to disengage their brains. Shortage of engineers is as acute as pilots. There's no point in having the pilots if you don't have any aircraft to fly because they aren't serviced. Boeing's now forecasting 754,000 maintenance personnel in the next 20 years, and this has increased 22% from their previous forecast. 34% of these shortages will be in Southeast Asia. Now, one of the reasons that the regulatory reform in Australia has sort of changed so dramatically has been so that Qantas can send aircraft off to Singapore and other places for their heavy maintenance. So that sort of alleviates a bit of their problem. But for the industry, we are going to be critically short of engineers. While talking about the Boeing survey, Boeing also predicting 890,000 extra cabin crew positions in the next 20 years. So if you add those three up, you're looking at 2.5 million direct airline staff before looking at support staff, etc. It's quite a growth industry. Okay, looking at the orders, 42,730 new aircraft, majority of which are single aisle, the sort of ideal low costs airlines, and at a sort of total bill of 6.3 trillion US trumps. So looking at the future, I call this galloping goalposts because nobody knows where we will be in the future. New developments are advancing far quicker than the manufacturers can incorporate, and it's all very well having these into the new aircraft, but then you've got to have regulations to ensure that they are safe. So the regulators are historically not the fastest people to implement changes, so this is a further problem for the industry. The complexity of the systems is something that is cause for concern. I think the aviation term is being startled just by that information overload. One error message coming up, followed by sort of many others, can result in the pilot losing their number one priority, that is to fly the aircraft. I think the Air France example is a good example of this. Next one is hybrid and electric aircraft. With the increased emphasis on environmental concerns and cost cutting, I do believe these will be coming. We're just merely waiting for improvements in battery technology to make these a reality. You've got Boeing's venture investment division called Horizon X, has a strategic alliance with JetBlue Technologies Ventures to develop hybrid to electric. That is the one on the left. I think it's 12-seater and 30-seaters, and these are really going to revolutionize, they intend to revolutionize small and medium haul flights around America to places that can't justify the big jets landing. On the right there you've got the Airbus, who teamed up with Rolls-Royce and Siemens in a venture called eFanX to modify a BAE RJ100 with inner electric engines and conventional outer engines. In the cruise, the electric engines will produce the majority of the thrust, and the conventional engines will be used for additional thrust or just to charge the batteries. I do personally, I think if one's looking 20 years time down the road, I think this will become a reality. Now to get fairly controversial, single pilot operations. Airlines are putting pressure on the major manufacturers at this stage to come up with aircraft of the future to be single pilot operations. In one fell swoop, pilot shortage would be solved. Pilot bodies would no doubt cite Sully and landing in the Hudson as to why two people up front would be a very good idea. But imagine a scenario where the majority of short to medium haul aircraft have one person up front and a second person is back in a dedicated operations room monitoring 10 to 20 other aircraft, ready to take control or to give advice or assistance where necessary. Rio Tinto driving haul trucks and operating trains in the Pilbara from back in Perth. So why not aircraft? Okay, I know it's controversial, but let's stretch it to the extreme and autonomous aircraft. Yeah, right. Stretching, so just think of the cost savings, eliminating having to negotiate enterprise bargaining agreements with those troublesome, greedy, lazy pilots. It's an employer's dream. One fell swoop, they can sleep well for half the night and worry about the shortage of engineers for the other half of the night. This is the Airbus test. It's flown a number of times very successfully, and with the pilot on the ground. Well, I've actually got what can go wrong in my thing, but I thought not to do it. Okay, off-site air traffic control. It works in Sweden, works very well. Air Services Australia have tried it successfully. So you could very well look at, instead of having 5 or 6 people staffed up at Alice Springs, for example, you could be running Alice Springs from Brisbane or Melbourne or something like that. And that this will be coming far sooner than the single pilot aircraft. Moving on, extended maintenance cycles. As aircraft become more advanced, so their diagnostic tools to identify something not working is far more is easily attainable. The expectation is that your maintenance intervals will be extended and reducing the demand for engineers. Just as an aside, a friend of mine is credited with the first mid-air shutdown of a 787 engine. About 30 minutes after taking off from Manila, he received a warning that the engine wasn't performing correctly, checked the vibrometer and some other instruments, and then proceeded, he and his co-pilot, to shut down the engine and return to Manila. Once he'd returned to Manila and gone through all the red tape associated with that, he phoned operations in Brunei. It was put through to their chief engineer, and he was told that Boeing in Seattle had phoned the chief engineer, and they were discussing that engine 5 minutes before he even got the warning notice. That's how sophisticated the telemetry is these days. So possibly sleep-deprived executive can now enjoy a full night's sleep. Reduced entry requirements, this is a fact, it's happening right now. It has been happening for at least a year. As the pilot shortage bites, so airlines reduce their entry requirements. Last year, Emirates, for I think a 3-month period, actually even didn't require the pilots to have jet experience. It's happening in Australia, and I think Australia will eventually mirror the EASA route, whereby a bare bones commercial pilot with their ATPLs and a multi-engine instrument rating will be sitting in the right-hand seat of your low-cost carriers such as Ryanair and EasyJet, etc. The various airlines in Australia have already started to cut their entry requirements, and I just think it'll get more and more. No longer will a commercial pilot have to become an instructor or go up north to gain their hours. They'll move straight into the airlines. Okay, there's absolutely no way that regulators can keep up with the drone technology, and I do feel sorry for them in this case. It's advancing at leaps and bounds. I mean, I've just got from delivering pizzas to your either your piloted or your autonomous aerial Uber taxis, and the sky is literally the limit. I was speaking to somebody a couple of months ago, and they were saying that town planners are now starting to factor in how are we going to have the aerial taxi routes so that it doesn't devalue house prices, etc. And then just sort of as an example of new technology, somebody was citing this as the new Boeing 797, it's a very good hoax, but that is certainly NASA have been putting a lot of money and work into this. The blended wing concept has a sort of projected 50% reduction in the lift drag ratio, and therefore you don't need so much fuel. What I'd like to make the point of now, there are a lot of things in 20 years' time that we will not just have thought about right now. So our capacity to embrace change will be the determining factor of who's going to succeed in the industry or not. Living in the past, unfortunately, will no longer sort of be prerequisite for success. So let's look at current flying training before gazing into the crystal ball of the future. There is a critical instructor shortage at the moment, and I will blame the larger airlines in Australia and throughout the world for embarking on an intensive recruitment drive. I'm not going to mention any names because I'm on video, but I blame the legacy airlines for not playing the game and recruiting sort of So mass recruiting and then no recruiting at all, then mass recruiting. It's been going on, there have been cycles throughout the last 20, 30 years, but it's never been as intense at the moment. As regional pilots leave in droves to join these airlines, there's a void that has to be filled, and instructors that would put in 3-4 years with us are suddenly sort of being sucked up into the airlines, and we are critically short. I want to voice my disapproval of the government in awarding special 457 visas for airline pilots. I think it's disgraceful that we've got to stoop to this level to make up for their lack of planning. I think Australia should be able to train our own pilots, not have to recruit any in. I know this may sound like sour grapes, and it probably is, but I do feel strongly about this subject. Moving to Jandakot now, China Southern about to restart. ST Aerospace is relocating much of their ab initio training from Ballarat to Jandakot because 40% of their flights are cancelled due weather. We've got Air Flight and Major Blue starting up at Jandakot. So I predict that between 70 and 100 new instructor jobs will become available at Jandakot in the next 12 months. Now this is great news for the club, very good news. As thanks to John Douglas and Glenda Dyke, we are acknowledged as having an exceptional instructor training school, producing very high standard instructors. Unfortunately for us, without the guarantee supply of students that an airline contract will provide, it is financially impossible for us to employ all these new instructors on a full-time basis. So they will then go and join those that can, namely Singapore Flying College and China Southern. Singapore Flying College are now advertising that they will train, they'll pay for the instructor rating in return for a 3-year return of service bond. That is, I congratulate them for that, but that could suddenly create the expectation that the employer needs to pay for the instructor rating. That's something we can't afford to do. I do see the instructor shortage as being a temporary glitch that will iron itself out in the next 2 to 3 years. In the meantime, there's a bit of a problem for us. Certainly keeps our head of operations awake at night. Other exciting changes at Jandakot will be the extension of runways and the introduction of the RFDS PC-24 jets. Another problem that we've got in the industry at the moment is the shortage of career instructors. The remuneration is less than half that of the airline package for 10 times the amount of stress. So why on earth would somebody want to be a career instructor? That's what the industry derives. The John Douglases of this world are absolutely gold. With their wisdom and their experience, we need people like that in the industry, and unfortunately, they're not being replaced. Flying management requirements, the new Part 141, 142 that has been introduced now require senior flying management positions to have a string of qualifications such that appointments now unfortunately are being made on box ticking rather than their suitability. You've got to have X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, etc. And to get somebody that ticks all those boxes doesn't necessarily make them a good manager. As my father said, an excellent teacher doesn't make an excellent headmaster. You've got to choose the right people, and it's a management position, so the most important attribute, I believe, should be management. And we are darn lucky to have our head of operations, David Royans, as an exceptional manager. Established training organisations throughout Australia are battling to remain open due to their inability to secure a head of operations that ticks the required boxes. Next one I call the Lamy time bomb. It's well and truly exploded. There aren't sufficient entrants into the industry to meet future demands. CASA have made the licensing regulations very difficult. And the current MEA training packages don't help either. And I hope the newly established Aviation Australia, it's created by the Queensland Government, will help us to have a far more practical approach to training. It just appears that our youth simply don't see aircraft maintenance as a career option. In my opinion, it's one of the last industries in Australia that will almost guarantee you a job when you complete. To quote Glenn Capel, a person with over 50 years experience in the industry, anything mechanical that involves getting your hands dirty is simply not popular anymore. To compound the problem, the experienced lamies that are crucial traineeship to be successful are retiring. Trainees depend on the wisdom and decades of experience of these experienced lamies. they are retiring far quicker. The future is pretty bleak. The club's got 3 apprentices at this moment in various stages of their training, but once they become licensed, they'll move on shortly thereafter because they'll want to get turbine and jet experience. You can't blame them for that because they are obviously paid a lot better. The club has always been an entry-level employer, and we're very proud of our contribution to the industry. Okay, the age-old thing, cost. Learning to fly has never been cheap, but it's also never ever been so expensive as it is now. The traditional route of getting a commercial license, then your night rating, a aerobatics rating, and your instructor rating, working as an instructor while you get your multi-engine instrument rating, nowadays will leave no change out of $135,000. Just as an aside on this one, previously, prior to Part 61 coming in, our instructors were able to, when they finished their instructor rating, they'd receive some in-house mentoring and they could do night training. Nowadays with Part 61, you've got to have an extra 8 hours of solo or command flying they've got to pay for, and then do a night training approval flight test, again which they've got to pay for. And it is really difficult to try and get people that have got a fairly substantial loan, or parents are tapping them on the shoulder, so come it's payback time, you need to sort of reverse the cash flow a bit here. So suddenly, well, you've got to fork out another $6,000 to be able to train at night. There's absolutely no safety justification in my opinion. Just another brick wall in the wall of additional costs, and I won't even start on ASICs and that cost. In the past, this club has been incredibly successful. John Douglas and others before him have set up a very good business model of having commercial training and club training, and it is blended very well together, very successfully. I question whether mixing club, social and integrated flying training is still appropriate. Part 61, 141, 142 have been the death knell of a number of flying training organisations throughout Australia. It's just too expensive to operating a training school these days without a critical mass that a lot of these smaller schools just cannot achieve. And moving to fleet, majority of the training fleet in Australia is old, or it's not state of the art. The tried and tested 152 Aerobat remains the best ab initio trainer in the world. Speak to John Douglas. However, the exponential growth in the cost of spares is rapidly consigning these fantastic aircraft to the scrap heap. Just an example, the engine frame for a 152, $17,000 US. The front fork, $16,000 US. The airbox, $9,000 US. I mean, that's just indicative of the costs that the legacy aircraft have to put up with. In general, training organisations throughout Australia do not have modern fleet due to the cost of new aircraft, at a time when the industry is expecting the newly minted CPLs to be familiar with this new technology. So talking of fleet gives me the excellent ideal segue into the next section, flying training for the future. All right, integrated training, without a doubt, integrated commercial training will have to meet the demands of the industry in the future. It's a very rapidly changing industry and a significant time lag before identifying a need and having the appropriate fleet to meet this need. So the future is definitely going to be interesting. So what are the immediate requirements of the commercial pilot in the 2020s? Got to be used to the glass cockpit. All modern aircraft, new aircraft have got a glass cockpit. I still personally believe that ab initio training should be done on the old conventional analog gauges, but then moving on to glass for the remainder of the training. Obviously there will be greater use of simulators as these evolve into mirroring the aircraft more and more, so increased utilisation of the training aids will be incorporated into the syllabus. There will be emphasis on cockpit resource management, multi-crew cooperation training, and there'll be more focus on nav aids. The club used to train the JAA, the European training, and I was amazed at the fact that that was really focusing on sort of nav aids, and VFR was not important at all. Mind you, if you flew in Europe, you can't see much, so what's the point of VFR training? That's going to, I reckon the syllabus is going to be retweaked to accommodate that. Certainly when we get European pilots that come to Australia and want to convert their licenses to an Australian license, they really battle with the VFR element of the flight test and requiring quite a few tests. Get a bit of a controversial one. If one's going straight from here to the airlines, do you need to have 70 hours, solo hours? I can see the syllabus being tweaked a bit to accommodate that. Looking at your propulsion units, leaded avgas is on its way out. The tried and tested Continentals and Lycoming engines will be replaced. Diamond have got some pretty natty diesel engines that are being used at the moment. MoGas is definitely, your Rotax can run on them. The new Lycoming IO360 1MA has got electronic ignitions, therefore you can use MoGas on those. And I do believe that quite a lot of ab initio training can be done in electric aircraft in the next 5 years or so, at $5 an hour compared to sort of $220 an hour. And your multi-crew license, I think it was about 2006, but it was about then that the MPL came in. Boeing and Airbus realised that the potential aircraft orders might be jeopardised because there just weren't enough pilots. And if they knew back then, I don't know why Qantas and Virgin couldn't take heed and focus on their training now. The multi-crew pilot's license evolved to remedy the situation where the pilot does about 40 or 50 hours of actual flying, the rest in simulators, and should the pilot be incapacitated or there be a problem, he would be able to step in and hopefully safely land that aircraft. Now, CAE Systems have recently signed a deal with AirAsia to train a further 400 pilots in their KL, Melbourne and Phoenix branches. Legacy airlines have turned their nose up at the prospect of the MPL, but given the pilot shortage, for how long can they keep up this nonsense? Surely this is not why continuous descent approaches and autoland were incorporated. Okay, so that's integrated training. Does everyone understand integrated training is really, that's airline training? Moving on to your non-integrated training, to be perfectly frank, this market is declining very rapidly. We can guess why. It's difficult to come up with a definitive answer. There are many reasons or excuses why this market is waning. There's conjecture that the youth of today simply don't aspire to become pilots. It is no longer held in such esteem, possibly because they fly computer games so much, or that they've experienced flight before they're 10 years old. The pathway to a pilot is, as you all know, not an easy one, and resilience doesn't seem to be a strong character trait of our youth. The training aircraft was a decade, and undoubtedly the cost is extreme. A PPL nowadays, you won't get change out of $30,000. Also, it does take time to qualify compared to somebody wanting to get their PPL or buying a jet ski. Well, let me buy the jet ski and I can enjoy it tomorrow. Regulatory reform, one needs to be a lawyer to know what you can and you can't do these days. There's significant regulatory reform has stifled the fun element in flying. The lack of key personnel to help with to make sure that you've got the right management structure in any training school is a problem I've spoken about. And then you've got your light sport aircraft, your recreation aviation Australia, doing a pretty good job of making fun out of flying again. It is cheaper, aircraft are more modern, it's self-administered, bypassing a lot of CASA. There is a fairly high accident rate compared to general aviation. I do believe that they are getting this a lot better. Okay, so I'm sure there are a lot of other reasons why this market is declining, but certainly it's up to us to come up with a sustainable model that ensures the longevity of the training school. Embracing the light sport aircraft is definitely an option. And one can always do the majority of one's training in one of these light sport aircraft, such as the sort of sling outside, and then just convert your license to a VH license at a later date. There's also a worldwide decrease in membership of clubs, whether it's yacht clubs, golf clubs, any clubs, that is a problem, and we are aware of that. It's also within those clubs there's a reluctance for volunteers to stick their hand up. More and more functions are shoved onto fewer and fewer volunteers instead of spreading the load, and this doesn't augur well for clubs. So enough doom and gloom. The future of the aviation industry is better than it ever has been before, and I genuinely mean that. A huge amount of jobs that need to be filled, so get the right mix as a flying training organisation, and that certainly will help. So I've almost finished. To summarise, I want to put forward what I believe the characteristics of the integrated and non-integrated schools of the future will be. So looking at integrated, obviously modern fleet, glass cockpits, all the bells and whistles, good aircraft replacement policy, up-to-date advanced simulators. They're not cheap themselves, but they're cheaper to operate than aircraft. Definitely need ongoing industry interaction. The college here has an industry presentation once a month where somebody, hopefully a graduate, comes and talks to our students about their pathway from completing their training here to where they are now, and over their current employer, and then also the sort of pearls of wisdom on how to succeed in industry or how not to annoy the chief pilot. And that certainly has been working very well. Definitely a state-of-the-art theory, not relying on books or self-study, right through to your IREX and your ATPLs. An alliance with an airline, I see that the future as being very, very important. And you need a training syllabus that automatically includes instructor training into your package, so that while some students can join the airline and they can sort of progress, others can be held back, become instructors, but when they sort of finish their 3 years of instructing, they join that airline without any loss in seniority. So that sort of package needs to be developed. It's got to be run as a business, unfortunately not as a club. It's got to be run as a business and with a proper airline culture. Fairly controversial. I don't believe that integrated school of the future should be involved in non-commercial training. It should focus just on its core business. Non-integrated training, I believe the fleet will be predominantly light sport aircraft. There will be staffing issues, as the remuneration won't be as good as if you were the integrated school. There will be shortage of engineers. They won't have sufficient capital reserves or working capital. Very difficult to be competitive. And I think they'll be operating from non-certified airfields. It's just too expensive to operate from a place like Jandakot. The landing fees, if you're doing a commercial license with us at the moment, the landing fees are about $3,300 in that. I think probably a couple of you here probably got their commercial for less than that. Thank you very much for listening to me. I thoroughly enjoyed doing this. In my position, I need to be looking for the future, and possibly I was getting too bogged down until Brian came along, tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you need to do this. And so Brian, thank you. It has helped me. I've enjoyed it. And I've probably only tapped on quite a sort of scratched the surface. There's a lot more to do. But any questions?
Yes. What is your background?
I'm initially from South Africa. I left as soon as I could and I went to Botswana. I learned to fly in Botswana because it was just too dangerous to drive on the roads. You asked for it. 2002, they did a worldwide survey. The number of fatalities per 100,000 cars on the register. Germany was the safest place to drive in the world, with half a fatality per 100,000. England was 0.8, and South Africa was 12 fatalities, and Botswana was 372. That was in sort of one of the med rescue annual reports. The government queried that and sort of gave some statistics, and they came back and said, based on that, it's 384. So they shut up. So that's why I learned to fly. I thoroughly enjoyed flying around Botswana. Came to Australia, and first I wanted to drive around the country, sort of see Australia. Nobody told me how big it was. And got as far as, flew to Adelaide, and then to Melbourne, up into the Alps, and finance and admin was advertised at the club. I came here, worked for almost 4 years, burnt myself out, to be quite honest. Just new immigrant trying to prove themselves. I took a year off, got involved in the school chaplaincy movement, sort of administering 8 chaplains up in the hills. Thoroughly enjoyed it. My hobby is beekeeping, which I absolutely love. And then when the club got in a few problems, they said, could I come back, which I did. And it's been hard, but we're progressing pretty well. Just the college now, by the way, if anybody wants, does put on a Cert 3 of beekeeping. So it's a registered trading organisation, so we're sort of branching out a bit in that, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that also, because I've got so much spare time. So, yeah, the future is going to be interesting. I think that there has to be some significant changes from sort of what we are doing at the moment and what has worked very well in the past. The calibre of graduates that this organisation has produced, largely thanks to John Douglas, has been sort of way up there of the industry. Unfortunately, that's changing. I think that the airlines are just going to want to get the bare bones, mould them according to their standard operating procedures, and not require them to go and sort of get that experience up north. So I don't know what the people up north are going to be doing, because who's going to want to go and live in Broome and do 2 other jobs, etc., while they can pick up sort of odd jobs or flying jobs and sort of not get paid much.
So David, thank you very much.